Hello, everybody. It's one of those things that don't end. It's a structural historical paragraph. I know you've been working with this for a while, but how are we going to take this apart? Remember, we're looking for two evidentiary examples, and we're using these sources for Theodore Roosevelt, the Progressive Reader, our 11th grade lesson. Now, remember, this whole tool we're looking at, the structured historical paragraph tool. You should have a link to this actual tool. What is this tool? It's specifically, you're going to try to work with historical writing. It's basically, we're going to go beyond the sources and we're going to kind of take a deep dive using sources to back things up. And as you may know already, you're going to contextualize, which is going to be the subject of a different video. But what are we doing now? Remember all these sources we looked at? You made the T-chart. You said, was Teddy Roosevelt a progressive president or not? Yeah, there I go, circling again, or trying to circle it and making a mess out of it. Not so bad. Now, we looked if he was a progressive president or maybe not such a progressive president. And the reason we were doing that is this. Okay, click to add text. That scary big blue box your teacher is going to give you. Was the progressive era a period of progress or decline in American democracy, meaning within the United States for democracy? So we thought about Teddy Roosevelt, and we're going to use our T-charts to help us out. Now, they want you to review the structured historical paragraph tool with two evidentiary examples. The hyperlink is right there. I'm going to click on it. Boom. Your teacher may give it to you. If not, here it is. And oh my goodness, it looks intimidating, right? I know. So what are we going to do about that? Well, let's zoom in here. We're going to need a topic sentence, historical context, meaning where does this come in, what was going on, and then we're going to talk about introducing the evidence. After we introduce the evidence, we're going to discuss it. Now, that sounds great, but this is what they want me to do. I think I'm going to curl up and cry. No, I'm not. I'm going to figure out what to put into this blue box. How am I going to do that? Okay, I'm going to take it apart. Now, let's break this down. We're going to need a topic sentence, which is going to introduce the topic or main idea that we're going to explain in the paragraph. Then we're going to need the why, meaning the background information, which I told you we're going to have to look at another time. Next, we're going to introduce the evidence, meaning we're going to give background about the evidence that's going to help the audience better understand it. Finally, we're going to bring the evidence. We're going to use the facts that support the topic sentence. And yes, we're going to cite it. Now, how are we going to do this? Now, I started already over here. Theodore Roosevelt is famous for his accomplishments as a progressive president. Most of his actions moved the United States ahead. However, some made a greater impact in the United States, or some, let's change it to had a greater impact on the United States. So now the historical context, what was going on? Remember what was going on before Teddy Roosevelt became president? It was pretty messed up. During industrialization, let's talk about that, right? Okay. During industrialization, it'll do that a sentence now. After the Civil War, the United States moved ahead with factories and technology. New products were available and more workers started to, or new products were available and more workers joined the labor force. Okay. You probably want a third sentence. Make sure you get this nice and solid. Immigrants came into the same paragraph, United States again, came to the country, and many people built railroads. And railroads, not many people, and railroads were built. We don't want to be repetitious, right? We want to make sure we kind of use different words. That's our context, what was going on before. Now, we need to introduce our evidence. We need to give background about the evidence to help the audience better understand it. So now, let's go back to our sources. Let's think for a minute. We have the Roosevelt presidential timeline, and we have the first conservationist president, New Nationalism, Roosevelt's bold Grand Canyon move. So let's go back again to that presidential timeline that we worked with before, that we modeled the T-chart with, right? And what was going on. T. Roosevelt became president after McKinley was assassinated. Tab, that's the word for me. Roosevelt believed that the president should do whatever needs to be done to help the United States move forward. I like that auto suggest. Now, what's my evidence for that? Remember the T-chart going back? I'm going to go back so this way I don't have to read through all my sources, although I might want to go back to my source, but here's my first place I'm going to start with this T-chart for the timeline. Okay. One example, remember we supported the topic sentence, which was that he's famous for his accomplishments as progressive president. Some had greater impact in the United States. One example is the passage of the law limiting child labor in Washington, D.C. What's our evidence? It's going to be our timeline, but that's not enough. We got to go back and find that timeline, right? Here it is. Remember this? We circled child labor law. Congress passes a child labor law for the District of Columbia. So if we go back here, we can't just write timeline. We're going to write Roosevelt Presidential Timeline Miller Center. Remember, if we had page numbers, we would put that in too, or paragraph numbers. Now, it's not just enough to like put in the idea from the source, okay? One example is passage of the law limiting child labor in Washington, D.C. Child labor was a problem during industrialization. That's when, remember, you go to the factories and had all those little kids working at coal mines and building in the sewing in the sweatshops and doing things that were very, very unhealthy, and they weren't going to school. Child labor problem during industrialization as children were working in poor conditions and not going to school, right? It might be easier for you to see it this way. I'm just offering it as a thought with the purple in the background. So this way, it's not the lines underneath the text. Pause the video and reread this with the purple underneath. If your teacher actually gives you a copy of this presentation, you'll see that there are purple boxes under other parts as well. And there's a purple text boxes, excuse me, at the end for you to put in your information. Going back here, your next step is the discussion. You need to analyze the ideas presented in the evidence. Now, I started analyzing here, but when you're going to discuss it, you're going to analyze it. So let's take a look at this evidence now here. Let's move it up here where it belongs. This is where it is. We're going to keep going on the organizer. Now we're going to analyze the ideas presented in the evidence, right? Which we started to do. Okay. Now, they were teenagers. Okay. Children were working in conditions that needed to be addressed. Child labor was limited in Washington, D.C. And if you remember from your T-chart that, however, it was, now this is where analysis comes in. You're kind of like explaining why there might be another side. However, it was not limited throughout the United States. Congress did not, really could not, for different reasons, we're going to say did not, pass laws limiting child labor throughout country. Um, and by the way, they passed for Washington, D.C. because Washington, D.C. is controlled by Congress. And you would do that again for something else, for another piece of evidence, for a different source. I would probably go with, depending what you're comfortable with, either the Grand Canyon move or the first conservationist president, which we started to analyze together on the T-chart. I would look at that and then discuss it. Now, if it's easier for you, you might want to remember we're going to have the same topic sentence as before, but you're continuing in the same paragraph. Remember? Okay, we're over here now by introduce the evidence. I just put that up there so it's more clear for you and you'll remember. Okay. Think about industrializations and the problems mentioned beforehand. I would specifically talk about how like industry was rooting the environment and chopping down all those lovely tall trees and taking all sorts of other resources. And then you can talk about how this demonstrates progress because what was going on. Remember, this is your next step after you give your why. And then finally, cite evidence from the source. Okay, sentence, okay, we're going to provide the facts. Okay, this source, or you can give the title. This source demonstrates, illustrates, shows, don't say states. It drives your grader and your teacher crazy. And when you have that, then you're going to bring it all together for a discussion about the ideas of the evidence. You might want to take the other side to it. And then voila, you are not puzzled anymore. I'm going to take these and make them go away. You're not puzzled. You got this. You just completed a structured historical paragraph with 2 evidentiary examples tool. You got this.